Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Karen Whitaker. I'm co-CEO of Prevention Resources, and this is one of our several webinars we were presenting over the last year and into the coming year. So thank you for joining us. And our topic is anger management and conflict resolution. We all know, I think we all recognize that anger is a normal, healthy emotion, and conflict is part of life. I think what often gets us and our children and those that we work with in trouble is how we manage it. So that's what this presentation is about. It's really a common sense approach to something that's with some information that's very usable. So I'm going to hand it over to Nick, who's a member of our PR staff, and he's going to do some housekeeping. And our two presenters today are Sheila Miller and Victoria Sharkey, two members of our PR team. So Nick, you want to do some housekeeping items?
Sure. So our first thing on the list is there's a pre and post test that can be filled out at the end of the webinar. Make sure to fill that out right at the end, and you'll be in the running for a $50 Amazon gift card. And also, if you want the one CEU that is being offered for this webinar, you have to fill out that pre and post test as well. So be on the lookout for the link. If you missed the link, I sent an email earlier in the day with the link attached to it. So just keep an eye out. And also during the presentation, feel free to ask questions in the Q&A section on the bottom of the Zoom chat. And Victoria and Sheila will do their very best to answer anything asked. So without further ado, Sheila and Victoria, you want to get started?
Sure. Thanks, Nick, and thanks, Karen. So I'm Sheila Miller, and with me today is Victoria, and thank you for joining us. Today, we are going to be discussing anger and conflict management. As Karen mentioned, it's an important topic right now, given our circumstances around. With our never-ending snow, there's one headed our way. And let's not forget the pandemic that's upon us right now. And with all of our emotions right now and being in these close spaces, it's a good time to talk about how to manage anger and conflict in a healthy manner. And as Nick said, between Victoria and I, we will try and do chat. We have a intimate group today, so we should be able to make this interactive as we go through. And our word of the day is going to be snow, so you don't have to hear me say next all day. So snow, Victoria. So today we're going to go through these topics on our agenda. At the end of the presentation today, we hope that we have given you some things to reflect on and think about in terms of these topics. We're going to be defining anger. We're going to be talking about an anger meter, emotions meter, anger cycle, conflict resolution, communication strategies, and some resources to help you beyond the presentation today. Snow? So we thought we would start with a light clip to give you a visual of how anger can play out in a negative manner. So go ahead and hit roll, Victoria. Thanks.
So, how was the first day of school?
It was fine, I guess. I don't know.
Do you ever look at someone and wonder what is going on inside their head?
Did you guys pick up on that?
Sure did.
Something's wrong.
We're gonna find out what's happening, but we'll need support. Signal the husband.
Uh-oh, she's looking at us. What did she say?
What? Oh, sorry, sir. No one was listening.
Is it garbage night? We left the toilet seat up. What? What is it, woman? What?
Signal him again.
So, Riley, how was school?
You gotta be kidding me.
For this, we gave up that Brazilian helicopter pilot?
School was great, all right?
What was that? I thought you said we were gonna act casual.
Riley, is everything okay?
Sir, she just rolled her eyes at us.
All right, make a show of force. I don't want to have to put the foot down.
No, not the foot.
Riley, I do not like this new attitude.
Oh, I'll show you attitude, old man.
No, breathe.
What is your problem? Just leave me alone.
Sir, reporting high levels of sass.
Take it to DEFCON 2.
DEFCON 2.
I don't know where this disrespectful attitude came from.
You want a piece of this, Pops?
Yeah, well, what?
Prepare the foot.
Keys to safety position. Ready to launch on your command, sir.
Just shut up!
Fire!
That's it. Go to your room.
The foot is down. The foot is down.
Good job, gentlemen. That could have been a disaster.
Well, that was a disaster.
So you can see the mom is right. It is a disaster. You have 3 people that are now angry, and no one really knows why Riley didn't have a good day at school. No. So when we think about anger, there are a couple of myths we need to get out of our minds. And one is that anger is inherited. That is not true. It might appear that way because anger is a learned behavior. So if your parents yelled when they were angry, you might find yourself yelling when you're angry. But it's learned behavior, which is good because you can learn to manage it better. Another myth, anger automatically leads to aggression. So we can have anger does not always lead to aggression. It can be constructive, and you have tools to help you deal with your anger so that you can stop it from getting to a destructive aggression level. Another myth is you have to be aggressive to get what you want. It's kind of a myth that we hold around in the workplace. But really what you want to do is have assertiveness to express your needs. And what that might look like better worded would be being assertive, telling what your needs are. And you might have heard the term, you get more bees with honey as it relates to your inner relations with others. Snow? So what is anger? Anger is a normal emotion. And I like this quote on the side because I think it puts into perspective what can be positive out of anger. When you can turn the hurt and anger into the motivation to make your life better, you have succeeded in helping both yourself and others. So how can it be positive? Well, it can help you set limits and assert yourself. It helps you recognize, anger can make you recognize your personal limit and your boundaries, and that allows you to grow and learn more about yourself. Anger can be a powerful motivator to conflict resolution. Many times people don't want to be angry, so you are more likely to resolve a conflict instead of having it escalate into anger. And when you're in a conversation with someone, anger can be very helpful in verbal and nonverbal context to let the person know how you're feeling, whether it's you're rolling your eyes, your tone of voice. It lets others understand where you're coming from. But interestingly enough, too, anger can also signal an unmet need. You find that we have to recognize what our unmet needs are, and that may be masking itself as anger. And Victoria is going to go through those unmet needs in a little bit further detail. Snow?
Alrighty, thank you, Sheila. So on the opposite hand of anger being a healthy function and emotion in our life, it can also be unhealthy. So we outlined some of the unhealthy ways that you can use anger in your life, and hopefully on the flip side, you could recognize how we can make this positive. So to begin, anger prevents us from clearly thinking and making sound decisions. So in the heat of the moment, we may act rashly. So it's important to remember to relax and calm down and analyze the situation. We'll get further into this later. We can use anger as a form of intimidation and control. This is using anger to root fear. In these instances, and in all of these, we not only harm ourselves, but we also harm others and the relationship with others. So using anger as a form of fear is a negative function of anger. It can be used to punish others, again, also rooted in fear. And then it can also be used to protect us from emotional pain. So in the video we just watched, this is a good example. Riley used anger in order to not disclose what she was truly feeling to her parents. So she was protecting herself in a way. Anger can also be used as a false sense of empowerment. Anger makes us feel really powerful and strong. Using it as a false sense of empowerment prevents us from revealing those vulnerable emotions. So we'll further get into how it covers our unmet needs. And then lastly, it can be used to feel more morally superior. So as we discuss more about anger, to paint a clearer picture, we wanted to describe the different types of anger. And hopefully you can reflect on how you express anger. So to begin, there's outward anger. This is obvious and very observable. Usually when people are yelling or screaming, there's verbal and physical abuse, which is outward anger, or breaking things and destroying things. Moving forward, inward anger isn't so noticeable. It's very invisible, we could say. It takes form in negative self-talk or isolation. So this is more anger to yourself. You may deny yourself pleasurable things or take form in self-harm. And then passive anger is very subtle and indirect. This is really encapsulated with sarcasm. When using sarcasm, that's not a very effective way of communicating your emotions, and it doesn't really contribute to a positive interpersonal relationship. So sarcasm is very damaging because even if you say, oh, I didn't mean that, I was being sarcastic, well, you still said it, so you don't know how another person may receive that statement. So that sarcastic anger is still damaging to others. So passive is subtle and indirect and can also take form as the silent treatment. So when looking at these three types of anger, it's important to recognize what's behind that. And so we like to look at what's beneath the hood, what's behind the curtain, what's beneath anger. So when thinking about anger, it's important to recognize that anger is often a secondary emotion, and that when anger makes us feel powerful, there's actually a more vulnerable primary emotion that we're not allowing ourselves to recognize. And this is our unmet need when we are angry. So when angry, it's important to consider what's actually going on, what's really the root of my anger right now. And this first step allows us to begin to manage our anger, recognize specifically what makes us angry and what we can do to move on and manage it and identify those types of situations. So one thing to take from this is anger is often the cover to what we feel deep inside. So in times of anger, we encourage you to pause and reflect and think what's behind the curtain or what's behind the hood or under the hood. So asked to get some involvement here. If you guys could reflect on what some primary emotions may be behind anger. If you could put an emotion in the chat, I'll give you an easy one. We'll say sadness can be behind anger. In the video we just watched, perhaps Riley was sad and she didn't want to admit that to her parents, so she took form in anger. Let's see here.
And someone said fear, frustration. I would say nervousness, anxiety, hurt. Those are all really good.
Yeah, fear and frustration too, especially in the world of COVID. Stress is very high, so it's important to recognize what's going on day to day with you, and it may take form in anger, embarrassment. It's a very good one. Awesome, thank you guys, appreciate it. So moving forward with some of the emotions we just discussed, I really like this graphic. It does capture kind of what's, again, beneath the water for anger. As we know, an iceberg, you can only see a small fraction of it. So this is a nice graphic to really take time to reflect what emotions are behind anger. So some of the ones you've all mentioned are here: disappointment, exhaustion, feeling overwhelmed or embarrassed, being worried. So just take time to reflect on truly what is behind your anger. And so I think I had another comment.
Oh, someone loves it, your graphic.
Yeah, we can send it to you. It's a really nice one. Okay. And then moving forward, now that we know that there is underlying emotions and unmet needs behind anger, that's part of our first step for identifying anger. What are the thoughts and emotions that you're experiencing? What's your primary emotion? And then what kind of maybe repetitive thoughts you might have, or how are you looking at the situation? And then second, also consider what are your physical symptoms in that moment. Now, because I sometimes get nervous presenting, it's a little anxiety, I'm not gonna resort to anger, but I feel my heartbeat racing, or my blood pressure going up. But in times of anger, these are similar symptoms. These are like our adrenaline going. So usually when I get angry, my face gets very red and then my hands get really clammy. So if I am experiencing that, that's often the first sign for me, like, oh, I'm getting angry. It's time to take a step back and reflect on what's going on in this situation. So this is also an effective thing for us all to reflect on. If you could describe physically how you feel when you're angry. If you're all comfortable, you may also say something that you think when you're angry. But this is an effective way for us to reflect on our physical symptoms. Sheila, do you want to share how you feel when you're angry?
Oh, I can feel myself starting to get angry. I'll clench my fists and my heart starts racing really fast. So that's when I know I'm starting to get a little amped up. Mm-hmm. That's my first signs of anger. I think in the video you saw Riley roll her eyes. So
that's also a reaction to anger.
Mm-hmm.
Heart races and I immediately tear up.
Oh, thank you for sharing, Amy.
Blood pressure. Mm-hmm. That's the adrenaline, the like fear factor.
Yeah.
Very good. Thank you guys for sharing. So having reflected on how we physically feel, also part of our anger management plan to first identify how you're feeling. So next, Sheila is going to allow us or walk us through how we would apply this into a situation.
So this would be like your anger meter. Some people might call it an emotions meter. And you can tell by just a couple of comments that we had, this is very personal for each person. Everybody feels a little bit different when they're starting to get angry, and your thoughts are different. So it's your personal anger meter. And why is it important to know what your anger meter is? Well, it's your first step in controlling your anger. You have to understand how it's affecting you and how it's making you think. So to give you an idea of how the meter works, I had mentioned that I feel my fists clench and my heart races. That might be where I'm about a 3 on my meter. And then I might get up to about a 6 where I'm finding myself just having negative thoughts and only focusing in on that horrible situation that's making me angry. And I might get to a 9 when I start yelling. So that's how I can feel myself going up on my anger scale. I think we saw in the video too, the dad, I guess his 9 or 10 was he puts the foot down. That was the big thing there out of that. But the point is that it's different for everyone, but your first step to controlling your anger is recognizing your anger and how it makes you feel. And you can do this by having an anger meter journal, Snow. So once you're going through your anger meter, you also start to notice you have triggers, what we call red flag triggers. What are some things that can get you amped up, move you up the scale on your anger meter? So let's start with, it could be an event or a situation that happens. So like for me, I know right away if I have to talk to my ex about something important about the kids, I'm at a 3. And I'm conscious of that going into it so that I don't go to a 6. So you have to know what your event or situation is that's going to start you off. You also can have unresolved longstanding issues that can trigger you. Perhaps an example would be you're in a relationship and there's a budget and one individual is always going over on the budget, but you're not addressing it together. So that's going to become an unresolved or longstanding issue. You could also have what we call like the brown bagging. And the brown bagging is you're carrying around an incident from the past, like a brown bag with you. And we'll give you, and that's your defense mechanism. So that would play out with Victoria and I, whereas I can turn to her and say, you know, Victoria, you didn't call me today at 3 o'clock like you said you were.
Well, you're always late to when we hang out, and like you didn't call me last Wednesday anyway.
See how she brought her brown bag? She gave me the you always, and she brought up something from the past where now not dealing with the situation. So now we both are at a trigger point. And then you also notice too, another big red flag is a sensitive area, which might be politics, or it could be at this point in time where, maybe you're coming off a long illness and you're tired of everyone asking you, how are you feeling? What's going on? So it's important to know what your red flag triggers are. Again, another step towards managing your anger is knowing what can get you amped up. Snow. So let's see how a triggering event would play out in the anger cycle, move you up in your scale. So first you would have a situation, and then from there you have negative thoughts. And because of those negative thoughts, you have an emotion, and then you start having the physical symptoms, and then you have that behavioral response, such as yelling. And that all starts from the triggering event. So let me give you an idea of how that cycle might play out with an event. I'm at the store, I'm shopping, and I see Victoria and I wave to her, hi, and she doesn't wave back. And so I immediately think, she's mad at me. She clearly saw me, she's mad at me. And so now I'm trying to think, why is she mad at me? And she should have said hello to me. And so now I'm going through my emotional responses around that negative thought. And I might start having physical symptoms because now I'm just thinking about it. Remember what I said, when I'm on my anger meter, my heart starts racing. And as I move up, I'm only focusing in on that negative incident. And I might start forgetting what I was supposed to get at the grocery store. And so by the time I get to the counter and check out, I'm still thinking the negative thoughts. And the poor clerk might be asking me if I have coupons or my store card. And I just bark their head off because I'm just still so angry about what I thought was the confrontation with Victoria. So I think there was someone in the chat why my daughter's father is angry all about everything. So he's probably in like DEFCON 2 all the time, like in the video, right? So our next video is going to give you an idea of how you can stop that triggering event. We call the ABCD method, and we'll break it down after the video, but he does a really nice job of walking through a bad event and how he was able to stop it. So could you hit play, Victoria? Thanks.
In our last few times together, I've talked about the importance of knowing that anger is a secondary emotion. And I've said it's the tip of the iceberg, and underneath that is the real issues, whether you're hurt or frustrated or insecure. And I want to take a little bit different tack today. Maybe lean back, and I want to tell you a story because I want to give you a tool. And the best way I know to give you this tool is to tell a personal story and then show you how you actually backtrack and deal with anger. I was teaching this material, doing all this research, preparing it for the very first time. And it was a number of years ago. My family was very small. And I had a long day. As pastoring, the church had multiplied and multiplied, and the staff was growing. And it was one of those days that early morning, late night, a couple emails that were kind of critical, and had a meeting. Normally we ate dinner together every night. But this was one of those times where, early morning to about 9 at night. And I just had that wow. We all have those days at work, I got beat up. And deep in my heart, I just wanted my wife to be awake, maybe have a cup of coffee, hot tea, and say, hey, honey, how'd your day go? But I really wanted to tell her how my day went. And deep down, I wanted my wife to say, oh, Chip, I love you. Everything's going to be okay, and kind of like we are. And I thought, well, maybe, it's getting a little bit late. But, my son was 17. My youngest at the time was still at home. And I thought, well, he and I like to goof around. I'll at least, connect with him. And I knew my little girl would already be in bed. So I pull in, all right? Now, it's like 9:15. The house is dark. You got to be kidding me. So I'm thinking, oh, my wife is laying there, probably waiting to, Chip, how did your day go, et cetera. Well, I walk in the room, and that rhythmic breathing, I realize she's out. So I think, well, 9:15, I got a 17-year-old son. He's going to hang out with me. And I go, and he's in bed. And I'm thinking to myself, what is going on here? How can you be 17 years old and go to bed at 9:15? Maybe he had a hard practice, and I knew my daughter was asleep. And so, I go out there and I sit on my chair, I get a glass of orange juice and some crackers and cheese and put my feet up. And now, I have to tell you, I was unaware But the emotion was anger. I was mad at my wife for not being up. I was mad at my son for going to bed early. Now, this isn't logical, but this is how life works. I mean, I'm actually mad. And, I have cheese, crackers, watch, the end of ESPN, and I go to bed in a little bit of a bad mood, and I don't know why. Well, I wake up, and guess what? I'm still in a bad mood. And my daughter walks out, and, hey, Annie, is your bed made? Dad, I just got up. And then Teresa, I hear her from the kitchen, honey, what's wrong with you? And said something to my son, and she goes, hey, what's with you? I said, what do you mean, what's with me? So are you going to be critical? I mean, I get on her. I mean, this is like the first 5 minutes. What's with you? You tell you what, if you're going to treat me this way, I'm just going to get coffee and go to work. And I walked out, and I didn't slam the door, but I mean, I just let everybody know I'm hacked off. Now think of this. Their world was they got up, I walked down the hall, I'm harsh to one child, harsh to another child, tell my wife, I go out, I sit in my car, and with the car running, okay, now I want you to get, I realize I'm angry. And as I'm sitting there thinking I'm angry, I have just taught what I've been teaching you. Anger is a secondary emotion. What's under the hood? Unmet need. I'm embarrassed to say it, but I just needed my wife last night. Frustration, my expectation. I mean, we're buddies, my son and I. I mean, we're going to, shoot some hoops, do something. It's only 9:15. So I'm frustrated. And I'm insecure because I feel like all those messages I got, I needed someone to tell me I'm still okay because I took a lot of shots. I sat in my car for 10 minutes with it running my driveway, and I had a decision, and the decision I had is the one that you make every day. And here's the decision. Am I going to just be angry, stuff it, spew it, or leak it? Or am I going to deal with this issue? And here's what I tell you I did. I actually realized it. I went back in the house, and I said, honey, you know something? I was angry, and this sounds so crazy, but I felt angry. I did the I feel message. I felt angry because you weren't here. I explained the situation. I apologized. She puts her arm around and says, honey, I understand. Well, maybe tonight, after dinner, let's take a walk and get some good time to talk. My day went from an almost tragedy to restoration and connection because I, A, acknowledged my anger, B, I backtracked to what my emotion was, C, I considered the cause, and then D, I directed the right response. The A, B, C, Ds of anger is in our book to help you have the positive experience instead of the negative one. See you next time.
So,
Victoria and Sheila, I just want to go back to one thing real quick. Morgan had put something in the chat about her daughter's father always seems angry. And I know you talked about him going to DEFCON 5, but I think that's a really important point because one of the reasons we share this, and we share this in our co-parenting programs that we do, is so many times there is anger between co-parents. And we always talk about how that harms the child. And sometimes we say to parents, it's easy to kind of feed into the anger. When one person's angry, it's easy to be angry back. And one of my best things we try to say is try to diffuse it by, rather than saying you seem angry, which will probably exacerbate the anger, kind of the better thing to do is saying, is everything okay? Is there anything I can do to help? And that's sometimes hard to do with somebody you're co-parenting with that you may not like. But, that is a really good way to diffuse an anger.
Mm-hmm. Give opportunity to talk about emotions and communicate in that way.
Yes.
Pause and let's talk about what's going on rather than meaning the emotion. Do you want to add something, Sheila? We can continue.
No, I was going to say, I think when we talk about the conflict resolution, we can also talk about how that might be helpful. One of the pieces that the video just showed that might be helpful there too is, ABCD. So part of your anger management is your anger management and controlling how you react to situations and the triggers around you and being mindful of it. So in the situation that Chip presented, the activating event had nothing to do with anybody in the house, right? It was his unmet need. It was his secondary emotion of frustration, but he ended up interpreting that event in an angry manner. That was his belief. The consequences, which he didn't think about at the time, was how that unmet need and that emotion made him feel angry and how it affected the people around him being angry. What he did finally do was he did dispute that negative feeling and address it appropriately with the people around him. And so when you talk about anger and managing it, there is that activating event, and B is your belief about that event. And when you think about the consequences of how you act on that belief, that leads you to D, disputing it in a more positive manner. So the ABCDs can help stop that chain of events, like the grocery store incident I was talking about. Where I waved at Victoria, that was the event. I believed that she was mad at me, and I could have stopped right there at the belief if I had already gone to D to dispute my emotion and say, you know what, I'll just call her later and we can talk about it. I'm not going to get upset about it right now. It might be a misunderstanding. So, Snow, and kind of putting that all together, what we've been talking about on addressing anger is, let's break it down a little bit. Self-awareness is the key. And once you can be aware of your anger and how it affects you, it helps you break the cycle, but you have to acknowledge it first. So that's why we talked about the anger meter. And what you might notice is you can start identifying coping skills along with your triggers as you journal your anger meter. And how you're going to get to your coping skills is you're going to think of times where you were able to stop yourself from moving up on the anger meter. What did you do in that moment? How did you dispute it? How did you reflect on the consequences? And then that will help you build tools to use going forward to manage your anger. And being mindful of it. Being mindful means you're being aware of your thoughts and your emotions and how you're feeling, and not judging yourself. It's okay to be angry. It's a natural emotion. What you do with that anger is the mindfulness piece, trying to be mindful of the positive emotions around it and tuning out the negative. So you can practice the mindfulness. And let's talk a little bit more about coping skills and what that may look like. Snow? So as you're looking at coping skills when you're going through being more mindful of your anger, you can classify them into a couple of different areas. So some can be classified as avoiding situations. You want to try and avoid your triggers, like walk away from conversations that might trigger you, like politics. Don't be part of it. If you don't like family gatherings, don't go, or set a time limit to going. Some can be classified as taking a time out, taking some deep breaths, walking away. Perhaps you tell the individual that you're having a situation with, you know what, let's take a break and come back to this. Or even you just take a break from worrying about something until you can calm down a little bit. Some are diversions. Maybe you can FaceTime a friend, listen to music, go practice your hobby, read a book. And being mindful, keeping your anger log. That's going to help you determine which coping skills you're going to use with different triggers. And as always, a good self-care plan is important to help with your overall stress level. And we're going to talk about improving your conflict management skills in more detail to help as a coping skill. Is there anything in the chat we need to address? Are we good? Okay, Snow.
Alrighty. Thank you, Sheila. So we're going to switch gears here and take what we've just discussed about anger management, which was more based on us reflecting how we manage our anger, what we'll do if we do experience heightened emotions, we've recognized them and now implemented some coping skills. But now what do we do when we are faced on the receiving end or are observing someone else who is managing anger, or if you're in conflict with someone? So one of the ways we've broken down managing and recognizing conflict is by observing 3 levels through someone. So there'd be an event that implements a conflict, and then there's the anxiety level. This is the point where you'll first recognize, okay, someone is becoming angry, or I can tell they're really uncomfortable, something's bothering them. So at this stage, this is when it's best for you to prevent the situation from escalating by reassuring and acknowledging their emotions. So for example, if I were to tell Sheila's getting upset, if I were to see her in the supermarket and I can tell she's upset about something, I could say, do you want to talk about what you're feeling right now? Or like, it looks like something like you're not your normal self, or something's up. Like, give them an opportunity to speak. At this point, you can validate their emotions. I understand what you're feeling. But this is more so as the point where it's time to first recognize how each other are feeling. Let's have this open communication about our emotions and see if we can resolve conflict right here. If it does escalate, you'll observe someone becoming more defensive. Being defensive when we are in conflict is a way that people will react when they aren't communicating their emotions first. So at this stage, it's good to set limits and boundaries. So this may be observed as me saying, hey, Sheila, if you want, let's talk next week about this. I'll give you a call. Or like, I'm going to go take a break real quick and we can return to this conversation. So that's setting a limit. I know we need the timeout right now, but we should return to this conversation. This way, the boundary is an effective way to make sure you communicate positively the next time. And then escalating further to the acting out level, this is where there's more of a loss of control. Our emotions are most heightened in this stage. So at this point, it's best to fully step back so the situation does not escalate. And you can be clear in saying, we can't talk about this right now. We'll do this at a later date. And beyond all of this, one of the things we do want to emphasize, regardless of what level you reach in your conflict resolution, it's always good to debrief and reevaluate the situation. So while debriefing, this helps you out and this helps out the other person, allowing ourselves to reflect on what went right, what went wrong, what can I do next time to avoid this? And this will help us to further increase and strengthen our conflict resolution skills and make it so that we can effectively communicate at the anxiety level what's going on and how we're feeling so that we don't increase in conflict. So moving forward, some of the strategies we wanted to discuss in conflict resolution were the following four. To begin, active listening is a very effective way to allow someone to communicate your emotions to you. So in active listening, giving person your full attention and not interrupting them, allowing them to have that platform to convey their emotions. Active listening does apply to how you physically react to when someone's speaking to you. You're making eye contact, you're nodding, letting them know that you're hearing what they're saying. Meeting someone with the same tone and pitch and how they're speaking. We're both calmly communicating to each other. I'm actively meeting you and we're effectively communicating. And then active listening also has to do with acknowledging what they're saying as the conversation goes, saying, it sounds like you're saying this, or I hear you, I hear what you're saying. Moving forward, practicing empathy is acknowledging that person's emotions in conversation. So if Sheila were to be telling me how she's feeling, I could say, well, that makes sense, or you must feel awful. That's me validating how she's feeling. I could say, I understand how that could be overwhelming. And being empathetic in conversation allows that person to know that you are hearing them and that you aren't pushing aside their emotions, that your emotions are equally seated at this table during our conversation. So moving forward, I statements and reframing the situation, we're going to further break these down. So I statements, in our video we previously showed, Chip did use an I statement. He said he felt angry that his wife wasn't up when he came home. A less effective way to speak to someone would be using a you statement. So an example of this would be, Sheila, you never call me back after work, or you never do this, or something. It's me placing blame on her. Using a you statement shuts down the conversation. It avoids me from saying my emotions, and it places blame on the other person. The much more effective way to communicate, which is what we wanted to share with you today, is an I statement. It clearly communicates how you're feeling. It also includes your viewpoint, and it effectively expresses any needs that you realize that you have unmet, and helps that person to recognize what next step we want to take. So an effective I statement I could say is, Sheila, I feel like I would like to spend more time with you. And so I would appreciate it if you could try to get home earlier, or I feel like we would benefit from spending more time together. So not only does she hear how I feel, but she also sees what need we can work on together, spending more time together, quality time. And it sounds like I feel neglected. And then reframing the situation is what we like to describe as taking a step back and looking at what type of conflict are we dealing with here. So when observing what type of problem we're conflicting about, it's either maybe a solvable problem or a perpetual problem. So a solvable problem is something that we have much more control over. It's usually a short-term difference that has to do with a like or a dislike. So this is something that we have more control to work out and talk about how we're feeling and sit down and come to a compromise. And then on the other hand, there's a perpetual problem, which we have less control over, meaning I have less control over it because I'm in control of myself. So perpetual problem has to do usually with someone's values and beliefs, like religion, cultural beliefs, politics. These are things that I can't change about someone else. So a perpetual problem, if you recognize that's the type of problem you're having, it's important to reflect that you're in control of yourself, you aren't in control of others, and that through conversation, you can come to acceptance of people's beliefs and values, and recognizing that that's something you can't change will help you to recognize that it's a perpetual problem and to begin to move past it. And so acknowledging that there's a perpetual problem might be a trigger. So by recognizing this might be a trigger, to avoid it and move past it. And so having reflected on what types of problems we're looking at here, that helps us to move forward and reanalyze how we'll deal with future problems, and to see what you can learn from the situation and how you can improve from these experiences that we've previously had. And then lastly, one of the last things we wanted to add is at Prevention Resources, we do believe in all things prevention. So a preventative strategy is self-care. Self-care can act as part of our anger control plan. We mean by it being part of our anger control plan that we don't partake in self-care once we realize we're angry. We partake in self-care in order to make it so that our anger does not boil over, and we manage it and we de-stress. Defining your self-care means what works for you might not work for someone else, and finding how regularly you partake in self-care is important too. Maybe it's every day for you, or it's once a week, and practicing it as often as necessary for you is important too. Self-care can be exercising, reading a book, journaling, whatever works best for you, so as that it allows you time to yourself, to relax, and to sit and evaluate and say, what are my unmet needs right now? What might be an issue later? So moving forward, Sheila's going to wrap up everything for us today with what we've covered in anger management and conflict resolutions.
So hopefully we've given you, as I said in the beginning, lots to think about and reflect on, and you can make a commitment to work on your anger. And you want to start with having an anger management plan, learning your ABCDs so you can dispute a situation and stop it. Manage your secondary emotions. You have to recognize them first to manage them. So you need to be mindful of making the change and be very thoughtful about stopping on the anger meter before you progress, and make a commitment to change. Sign a document with yourself Mark your calendar, because then you can check your progress through journaling and self-reflection, maybe daily or weekly basis. And you should reward yourself or celebrate your accomplishments. You know, when you're able to use the ABCD and stop a situation from continuing through the angle cycle, give yourself credit, because maybe you only do it once one week, but maybe the following week you're able to stop it 2 times or 3 times. So it's the little successes that add up. No? So we do realize that, you know, you might get to a point where you need additional help. And that can be when your anger controls your emotional state and interferes with your personal relationships, or you regret things that you've done in anger. And so over there on the right-hand side are some resources for you to use if you feel like you're fitting into these categories after you've tried to work on your anger management. And I know there was a lot going on in the chat in relation to future anger management, and I think that might have been cleared up, unless there was another question about future programs or anything about what we have discussed today.
We have the prevention number there, and other resources in the community, which is important. And if anyone has anything else to add or comments or questions, feel free. But we appreciate you guys all joining us today.
And thank you everyone that shared.
Yeah, Victoria and Sheila, really excellent presentation. I think you really absolutely covered all the key components that we need to be aware of to manage anger. So thank you very much. So Nick, do you want to take over for some of the post housekeeping?
Sure. So in the chat, I just posted the pre and post evaluation. Now, make sure you fill that out in order to be in the running for the $50 gift card, and if you want your CEU for attending today's webinar. Also, keep an eye out for our other events. On March 17th, we will be having a mental health first aid lunch and learn webinar, and I will post that momentarily into the chat. But besides that, feel free to put any Q&A items you have for Victoria and Sheila, because they had so much information. It was amazing. I'm sure some of you have questions about it.
I think someone asked Nick if you could answer for them if the presentation would be available.
This whole presentation was recorded, so it will be put on our website as soon as possible. So you can find it there.
All right. Thank you, guys. Thanks, everyone. Doesn't seem like we have more questions right now, and they do have our email, so they can always get in contact with us. Have a great day. Great presentation. Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.